South Sea Islanders.
The member for Dawson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to Australian South Sea Islanders in the terms which it appears in the notice paper. Madam Deputy Speaker, on the banks of the Pioneer River in Mackay, there's an impressive piece of public art called the Sugar Cubes. While the average man in the street may not know what it represents, there are about 3,000 people in the area who do, and these are the descendants of South Sea Islanders brought to our shores by force, coercion or bribery more than 150 years ago. The Sugar Cubes, a semicircle of tall piles of cubes crafted out of steel, tell the story of their ancestors. This period of our history, the blackbirding era, is the closest thing Australia has had to a slave trade. About 63,000 South Sea Islanders were brought to Queensland, and each sugar cube bears the name of a trade ship which carried human cargo, as well as the name of the plantation that they were sent to work on. These workers came mainly from the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. In 1 year alone, 1881, 1,789 people were brought to Queensland in 31 ships. 15 of those ships came directly to Mackay, sometimes at a rate of one each week, and their trade continued for 40 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, many are familiar with what happened, but I suspect few have stopped to consider the sheer number of people who were affected. Many died during the long voyage to Queensland, and more died after arrival from diseases like dysentery, pneumonia and tuberculosis. You could probably call the next sad chapter of their story discrimination by legislation. The dawn of Federation in 1901 brought with it the push from the union movement for a white Australia, and thousands of South Sea Islander labourers were deported under the Pacific Island Labourers Act. Other racist legislation followed, like the 1905 Sugar Bounties Act, which rewarded producers who used white labour, and the 1913 Sugar Cultivation Act, which required islanders wanting to grow cane to be able to read and write 50 words in any language. Between 1900 and 1940, there were at least 40 pieces of discriminatory legislation on the statute books. There were restrictions on voting, land ownership, fishing for pearl shell. They were even banned from employment in butter factories. This was a bitter pill to swallow, particularly in relation to the sugar industry, because their labour in the cane fields, their contribution to the establishment and ongoing success of the sugar industry was significant. And this is another chapter of the story which is rarely told. In 1902, about 84% of labourers in Queensland Sugar were non-white workers. Another source states that since these islanders performed all the field work connected with the sugar industry, it is probable that without them, the initial enterprise should not have been forthcoming, and very few of the old mills and plantations should have seen the light of day. It was a significant contribution for one of the state's most significant and enduring industries, accounting for 1.7% of total exports in 1900 and growing to 25% by 1980. More chapters of the story have unfolded throughout the lives of many Australian South Sea Islanders who have contributed to our culture. Rowena Travey from Mackay and Joe Leo from Rockhampton are both OAM recipients. Mal Meninga has made a legendary contribution to the sport of rugby league, and Faith Bandler, who championed recognition long before others, was made a companion of the Order of Australia in 2009. Proud Australian South Sea Islanders did not shirk their duty when it came to serving their country. Sadly, Mackay man Frank Faquandi was the first Australian killed in the Vietnam War, and Percy Mooney Sr., who still lives in his family home at Urbana, enlisted and served in World War II. Others who made significant contributions in Mackay include Cedric Andrew, Greg Sutherland, Jeanette Morgan, Christine Andrew, Winnie Boa, Kay Fatnauna and the late Noel Fatnauna. There is no doubt that the day of official recognition in this Parliament on August 25th, 1994 was a landmark moment, and I want to pay tribute to the efforts of former member for Dawson Ray Braithwaite, who pressured the Keating government at the time to respond to the call for recognition. Mackay's Greg Sutherland, who is also chair of the National Australian South Sea Islander Working Group, remembers the day well. He said, "A lot of us were excited and pleased to be finally recognised for our heritage and our contribution to the state, and I guess we were hoping a bit more would come from it." Madam Speaker, at the time of recognition it was noted that the government of the day needed to assess how it was servicing the needs of Australian South Sea Islander people. 20 years on, the time is right to again take stock as the next chapter of their journey unfolds. Why is it that proud Australian South Sea Islanders cannot tick a box on their national census forms acknowledging their distinct heritage? And why is it that Australian South Sea Islanders in need of special treatment for conditions like diabetes need to deny their heritage in order to access what is readily available to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders? These questions need to be answered, and as Chair of the Social Policy and Legal Affairs Committee of the House, I will call for a roundtable to give full and proper consideration to those issues.
I thank the member. Is the